This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. You know, I was having a conversation the other day of really trying to figure out what's actually going on with the Browns defense when they play on the road. Why do they look like such world beaters at home, even when they play good teams and then play teams that we assume to be mediocre on the road and not look as good? And I think I've figured out an answer to that I feel comfortable with sharing, because it seems like this is what this whole defensive thing is about. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there's a split out there that's a pretty telling split that the Browns give up the most points per game in the NFL on the road, 30.7. Also the fewest points in the NFL at home, 12.6. You look at that stat and you go, do the Browns just not like playing on the road? Is it something about being in a hotel? And I think we default to those answers because we're all human, right? We know that naturally being at home is much more comfortable than being on the road for most of us, right? Like a lot of us like being at home. So we think it has something to do with that. But in sports, I'd argue that it's probably has less to do with that. Because you'll see teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars are a great example of this, right? If you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars right now, they are one of the worst home teams in the NFL. Like point blank period. They are a terrible home team this year. They have 3 home wins, but technically one of those home wins was in Europe. So they really have 2 home wins this year. They are awful at home. They are 5-1 on the road this year, right? 5-1 on the road this year. What makes even less sense if you're the Jaguars is that last year you were a good home team. You honestly won most of your games, if not all of your games at home last year. Awful road team, good home team. It's interesting. Right? How do you go from being a good home team to an awful home team and a bad road team to a good road team? What changed? And I think the variables just changed more so than the reality of being home or away for that team. Because if you look at the team like Jacksonville's schedule, you'll see that their home games this year were not the easiest, right? They played Kansas City early in the year. They played Houston when CJ Stroud just started getting going. They played San Francisco right as they started getting going again. And then they played the Cincinnati Bengals. Nah, that one I can't explain. But also, to the point, they kind of caught the Bengals at the wrong time. Now, some might be asking, why am I using the Jaguars as an example for the Browns? Because when you use the Browns, sometimes people get their own feelings kind of wrapped up into it, so they can't see the point I'm trying to make. But if you use a different team that we're not as connected to, you can see the main point, which is these other factors are kind of why the Browns defense are not as good at home. I mean, not as good on the road as they are at home. And I think the other factors that are preventing the Browns from playing well or appearing to be a decent road team are pretty obvious, right? They have a lot more turnovers on the road than at home. They have +3. They have 12 turnovers at home, 15 on the road. If we're just going from the bye week, so when all the injury stuff happened at quarterback, whether Deshaun's in and out of the roster, PJ Walker, all of that, when the defense really started to have road game issues, because again, if you remember that Pittsburgh game, the Browns were good on the road in that game. They let Pittsburgh only had -7 yards in the fourth quarter of offense. So it's not like the Browns, every road game they've played terrible. Turnovers have factored into why in some of these road games the score has been higher than what it should be. And that Pittsburgh game's a perfect example. The defense played fine in that game. It's just, you turned the ball over. But since we're weeks away from that, we kind of forget the small details of that game. But if you just go from the bye week, it starts to be blaringly obvious. Since the bye week, on the road, the Browns have given up 11 turnovers on offense. At home, only 6. Also, keep in mind, all of the Browns' road games have come against teams in serious playoff contention right now. Like, that's a huge factor. If you're wondering why the Browns don't look as good on the road, that also factors into it. Because if I pull up the Browns' schedule, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. First road game is at Pittsburgh. Now, we know the franchise's issues with playing at Pittsburgh. They just haven't done it well. And we know why you lost that game. Deshaun Watson was flat out, goodness gracious, got off on that game. Then you go to the next road game at Indy, a team we thought was kind of like not that good when we played them. They're still in serious playoff contention right now. Then you go on the road at Seattle, a West Coast trip. It's also something you have to factor in. You didn't just have to play NFC West teams. You also played an AFC West team, so you had an extra West Coast trip. This has been a very tough road schedule for the Browns. You played the Colts, played the Seahawks, then you play at Baltimore, then you went on a West Coast trip again to Denver and LA. All of those teams are playing great football, or were playing great football when you played them, by the way. And Jake Burns, when I was having this conversation online, chimed in and said, hey, it also adds the unfathomable nature this year that most, not all, but most teams that they have played have come at the best point of that team's season. So Jake's saying, also the Browns have just come up with the worst luck when it comes to the schedule because they're playing teams when they're hot. Right. A good example of this is Denver. If you had that Denver game scheduled in week 2, you probably win that Denver game. But since that Denver game was scheduled in the middle of Denver's hottest stretch of the year, you lost. Also, since that Denver game was scheduled when you're going through multiple quarterbacks, DTR gets hurt. Your plan B for DTR, Joe Flacco, isn't active for the game. Ooh. It turned into a mess. And also, have to remember, PJ Walker turned the ball over like 4 times in that game. Like, turnovers on the road have gone up since the bye week. That's really the biggest issue that the Browns have had. And it's been a combination of all of these factors. It's been a combination of turnovers from the offense, a West Coast trip, a tough road schedule, and catching teams at their hottest point. And I can point to literally all of the teams on the road schedule and tell you this is the case, or at least most of the teams, right? That all of those things kind of occurred in the games that they played. Browns at Steelers. You're going to tell me that the Steelers got 26 points because the Steelers offense was cooking on this Browns defense? Or do you know for a fact that the Steelers got 26 points because Deshaun Watson turned that thing over 1,000,000 times? Also, you played Pittsburgh at one of the worst times to play Pittsburgh, right? Kenny Pickett was still feeling like he could do something. They were healthy enough. Not a great time to play Pittsburgh. You played the Colts when they were hot. They were coming off a little bit of a win streak. They're getting that shimmy in with Gardner Minshew. Also, you turned the ball over a lot in that game. Deshaun turned it over. PJ turned it over. I believe Jerome Ford even turned that bitch over at one point. Like, everybody was turning the ball over in that game. So they scored 39 points. But that one, look, the offense wasn't great that one. But, let's be real, man. The defense refused to tackle a couple times, and it was just egregious. So that one, they got that shit off on you. The Seahawks game. The Seahawks got the 24 points. I feel like they got the 24 points because the interception, sure, it was a turnover. Also, you're playing the Seahawks at the worst time to play the Seahawks. They were in first place at that time. They're not even close to first place right now. But you played them when they were hot. They got the turnover. Damn, they got you. That was not that egregious. They only scored 24 points. You know what I mean? Like, okay, you gave up that final drive. It sucked. Then you go to at Baltimore. Baltimore scored 33 points. Because they're one of the best teams in the NFL, but also because you threw a pick six in there. If they don't get that pick six, there's -7 points, and then that score looks a lot more respectable. Also, the defense kind of balled in that game. You play Baltimore at one of the worst times to play Baltimore in the year. They were still super hot, but hey, defense showed up, played well in that game. So this defense can put together good road performances. They've done it before, right? Pittsburgh and Baltimore, they both played well on the road in those games. Then you go to this West Coast trip. At Denver, at the Rams. Both of those teams were hotter than fish grease when you played them. Also, the Browns were probably at their worst point of the season, right? Not only were those teams playing their best football of the season, the Browns were going through another quarterback change in both of those games. And it showed, right? DTR gets hurt. And PJ Walker comes in and just turns the ball over a million times. Joe Flacco in that Rams game played well till the fourth quarter, threw an interception that turned into a touchdown, and then went 4 and out. That turned into a touchdown, which isn't on him. You just had to go for it at that point. But then took a safety, and those things kind of accumulated to 39 points or whatever it was, 36 points. So I think those stats about the Browns defense on the road are a bit inflated. Now, is it true that the Browns defensive performance hasn't been great on the road? I would argue yes, especially those last 2 weeks. They have happened to have their 4 worst games of the season all on the road. Indy, Denver, Rams, Colts. Like those, if you put me to a lie detector and said, show me the 4 worst performances from this Browns defense, that would be there. But does that mean that this Browns defense is not capable of playing good games on the road? I don't think so. Their next 2 road games are at Houston and at Cincinnati. I do think the Browns will be fine in those road games. One, there's nothing to suggest that there's such a bad road defense that they'll play down to an opponent. And if the Texans don't have CJ Stroud, then that would be a situation where you would have to play down to somebody. If they do, then that's a different story. Who knows? Maybe they prove themselves. Maybe they don't. At Cincinnati is another one where it's like, I've seen this Browns defense play well on the road in the division all year. I see no reason for that not to continue. But that's why the Browns are not a great road team. Yes, it has something to do with the travel, right? You've had a West Coast trip. You've changed time zones more than any team. I believe the Browns are like top 5 in miles traveled for any team. So that does play a factor in it. Also, you've been injury ridden all year. Like literally since the start of the year, we've been talking about injuries with this team. You've been injury ridden all year. As the season goes on, it's gotten worse. And as the season went on, not only did your injuries get worse, but your travel time went up. So that's another factor into it. But it's a combination of all of that, right? The turnovers from the offense, the amount of miles you had to go, the West Coast trip, a tough road schedule where you're playing teams in contention. Like even now, your last 2 road games are against 2 teams who are currently in playoff contention. Like when has some shit like that ever happened? Like, I'm being dead serious. Like, when is some shit like this has ever happened? It's not like the Browns have had a good home schedule either. It's not like it's been smooth cooking on the home schedule. The road schedule's just been ridiculous. The schedule in general has been ridiculous this year. It's amazing this team has achieved as much as they have. I'm dead serious. All of these road games they played, all of these teams are in serious playoff contention. That's insane. Have y'all realized that all of the road games have been against teams in playoff contention? Pittsburgh is the 6th seed. That was your first road game of the year. Then your next road game was against Indy. Indy's currently the 7th seed. Then your next road game was at Seattle, who was in first place when you played them, but they're tied for, they're 6 and 7 right now. They're tied for what is anywhere between the 5 seed and the 6 seed right now. They're in like a 5-way tie with a bunch of other mediocre and NFC West teams. But when you played them, they were in first place. They're still in playoff contention, like serious playoff contention. They can easily get into the playoffs. Baltimore is the 1 seed right now. We know that. Denver right now is the 9 seed with that 8-way tie or whatever it is at 7 and 6. So they could easily be in the playoffs. The LA Rams are also in that 6 and 7 tie, and they've been playing their best football of recently. Like, they took the Ravens to overtime. They're playing really good football. And then you play Houston, who's the 8th seed right now, and Cincinnati, who's also in that 8-way tie. Like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous with this road schedule. Like, if you want to know why the team ain't been that good on the road, look at who they playing. Back-to-back weeks. It's the worst road schedule I've ever seen. If they played Arizona on the road, I'm pretty sure they would beat Arizona by a healthy margin. But they ain't getting no kind of luck on these road games, right? Like, I think that has a lot to do with it. And I feel like the more and more I look at it, these variables have more to do with it than the actual, truth of the Browns just not being able to travel well for whatever reason. It's more or less, this is just one of the roughest road schedules in the NFL, because you're not only playing teams in playoff contention every time you go on the road, but you're playing teams in playoff contention that are possibly 2 time zones away. Sometimes back-to-back weeks, which the Browns asked for, by the way. But it didn't make for an easy schedule for them. And how many teams have the Browns played that are out of playoff contention this year? Tennessee, Arizona. That's it. Wait, that can't be right. That can't be right. Tennessee and Arizona. Yep. Okay, they play Chicago this week. They're not really in playoff contention. Then they play New York. That's it. They have 4 games against teams not in playoff contention. They've had only 2 of them. Hey, man, appreciate this season for what it's been, man, because this don't make no sense. This don't make no sense. And I almost feel like the team next year going to be set up for failure because, man, how can they do this and be any worse than 12, 13 wins next year? How can they do this and not run the table next year or something like that? But when they get healthy. But that's a whole nother conversation for the summertime, man. But that's why I think the Browns haven't been good on the road. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And tell me what you think of that road schedule. Tell me if these are things you've thought of when you thought about the Browns not being a good road team, because I don't think they've been in the conversation as much. We've been kind of making it about effort and all these other things. We haven't really given enough due diligence about it being about the travel, about the quality of opponent on the road, what quality of play that opponent is playing when you played them. I feel like everybody they've caught on the road, they caught at the wrong time to catch them. And they're just not getting any breaks. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.